Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Cindy looked pityingly at her hands, which were as red as boiled crayfish. It was a lot of dishes to wash. As luck would have it, the dishwasher had broken down again, and she had to work by hand. Even gloves didn't help. Besides, she hadn't liked washing dishes with gloves on since she was a child. You can't feel whether it's clean or not. Indeed, clean plates and cups even squeak when you run your finger over them. They are sticky from a layer of thinking, medium imperceptible to the eye. Here it came out sideways, diligently spoiled her hands. It is now swollen and ugly. I also chewed my nails again. It's a bad habit, especially when you're nervous. And Cindy had plenty to be nervous about. A year ago, she'd come here to the capital city with the certainty that she'd get in. And how could she do otherwise if she graduated from high school with a red diploma? But then miracles began to happen. The university, with the reputation of one of the most prestigious in the country, was not proudly satisfied with the results of the exam. She had to take a couple of full-time exams. On one of them she failed, and in the most brazen way. Well done. The teacher did his best. He kept his eyes on her during the exam, came up to check her writing and touched her elbow. Cindy didn't understand what he wanted, and was completely confused when a note fell on the table in front of her. Come and see me after the exam. She would have gone, except that the girl who sat behind her from curiosity stretched her neck and looked at the note, snidely inquired, "That you're going to earn a passing grade. Why is that?" I wrote it all down. Cindy was confused. The girl looked at her from head to toe and asked, "Did you come from the village, or did you come down from the mountains?" "I came from the village," Cindy answered honestly. Their working village, to be honest, was no different from the village. There was nowhere to work, unless you went back to your own school to be a teacher. Her name was Cindy. The girl had an obvious talent for the humanities, but Cindy couldn't imagine such a thing. Again, those notebooks, mean teenagers, snotty kids, drunken parents, and angry colleagues, who yesterday taught her how to teach herself. But no, she had to get to the city, enter a good university, get a diploma, and then all the doors would open before her. But she didn't realize that the doors would open in such a way. Squeezed her bewildered look and believing that Cindy is not pretending, and really does not understand how to end the invitation of a kind preposition. Her more sophisticated neighbor was not lazy. Preliminary to gather information from the girl students told that drool, such a nickname, gave him in the institute for a nasty habit of drooling on young girls' charms. It caught his eye. Girls help, but not for free, but in exchange for services of a certain kind. It doesn't work that way, Cindy protested, his mouth hanging open at the details. He'd have been kicked out a long time ago for that sort of thing. Well, as you can see, he wasn't, grinned the neighbor. Hand washes hand. You can't take the rubbish out of the house. So he's taking advantage. Cindy, looking into his eyes, tore up the note. He soon made a sour face. And then Cindy did not find her surname in the list of admissions, which flew by. It was the same girl who had recently opened her eyes to her true intentions. Preceptor. Cindy didn't bother to deny it. She reread the lucky list for the umpteenth time, hoping to find her last name. Maybe she'd missed it or gotten a letter wrong. It happens. At least I didn't have to undress in front of a disgusting man, said the girl. Maybe I shouldn't have told you. Everything would have been fine. What are you talking about? Of course you should have told me. Cindy shuddered at the possibility. The girl squinted, thought for a moment, and held out her hand. My name is Betty, by the way. Let's get to know each other. I'm Cindy. I'm Cindy. You know, I missed out too, Betty admitted. But I'm not going home. I'm not going home. I'm not going home. There's one thing I can do for a year. I can't afford to rent a place on my own. I got one mom. She can't afford to pay the price for me. It's a lot of money. And I don't want to tell her I didn't get in where I went to school. The best was a straight-A student, red diploma. And now why come back? Like a beaten dog. But no, it's better to work for a year. Then try again. Maybe even on a paid basis. Who knows if Savchenko drools from work or something else happens. Do you understand? Yeah, nodded Cindy. And where to find a job? I'm afraid in case they will cheat me if I don't get paid. or else as divorce. Don't worry, you're with me, Betty said cheerfully. I've already scouted out a cafeteria nearby. They're looking for help. What's that? Washing dishes, scrubbing toilets, scrubbing floors. Cindy grimaced. What do you have in your village babysitters? Did moms do that? Mockingly shook her head Betty Toilet. Here specially trained people give. You will not be allowed into this sphere. Everything is occupied. But you can get a job in the kitchen as a waitress, Cindy clarified. What about it? Betty was genuinely amused. You'd have to grow up to be a waitress. You need a dishwasher to peel potatoes again. But the pay's not bad. I checked. And the main thing is that the owner of the cafe is a normal guy, even though he's Oriental. The girls told me he's willing to take part-time jobs. But girls are like that. They'll either get a job or get married. And my uncle has a vacancy again. Right now, there are 2 of them needed. Go for it. Cindy reread the lists one last time. Her name never showed up. Corver's got Clarkson in stock. No Crawford. Agreed. Cindy sighed, resigned to this twist of fate, and asked we're going to get settled right away. Why wait? Betty was surprised. To get a good place for others, let's take our feet in our hands and go. The cafe turned out to be small, but located in a cozy place. And it had an air of style. It smelled divine. It was only now that Cindy realized how hungry she was. Apparently, the first stress had passed and a healthy appetite had asserted itself. However, the first thing to do was to talk to the host and dot all the I's. The girls set out to find him, bumping into a tall, handsome guy in the hallway. Could you tell me where I could find the owner of the cafe? Betty asked politely. The girl had clearly decided to take the initiative. Cindy was content to play the role of a wingwoman. He's in front of you. What are you interested in? Asked the guy appraisingly, looking at both of them. Cindy was surprised, but kept silent. But Betty looked at the young man from head to toe and said arrogantly, You don't look like much more than a waiter. So where's the owner? But look for it yourself if you're so smart. The guy snapped at them, turning his back on them. Tony, why raw girls too? Not nice, gently chided the middle-aged man. A man of Oriental appearance. Wiggled his teeth and hair, appearing in the hallway. Enough with the coolness. Go to work. The guy mumbled something to himself and disappeared from sight. And the man made an inviting gesture with his hand. Lovely ladies, what can I do for you? Let's continue this conversation over a cup of tea. Cindy's stomach was sticking out at this point, and Shuren laughed, tipped his head, and went to the tea rather. Lavage will find cheese, greens. Young ladies should eat well, especially a pretty one like that. At that moment, Cindy was relieved. She realized that no one would hurt her here. She liked the man at first sight. And indeed, sitting in his office over fragrant tea and flying away the freshest pita, the girls honestly told the owner their simple story. That jackal resented Shuren, worrying about them as if they were not just strange girls from the street, but his own nieces. How could the earth bear such people? Where are the fathers looking at the groom's brothers? They should be chased away like dogs, you naughty boy. All right, let's get down to business. He changed the subject abruptly. I've got 2 vacancies in the kitchen. One of the girls got enrolled and can't study or work. The other one got married. We had a party and you were not Belarusians. The girls looked at each other and assured that they were not afraid of any work. I'd even bought a special car. Shuren complained. I bought a special machine to wash plates and cups myself, but it breaks down. Oftentimes you have to work with your hands. Nothing. Cindy was afraid he was going to turn them down. I like washing dishes. I'd rather be a waitress, Betty admitted. Let's go like this. Shuren is a falconer with his tongue. First, you'll work in the kitchen. Then I'll let you out into the hall. If it works out, you'll become a waitress. The amount of the offered salary surprised Cindy a bit. To be honest, she had expected even less money. Betty, on the contrary, shook her lips. However, they both agreed. And they agreed that tomorrow they would start their labor activity. It remained to settle the question of housing. They also confessed to the owner of the cafe. Not a problem. He was reassuring. Here is the phone number of my relatives. Tell me that Shuren won't hurt you. From the cafe, Cindy came out with such a feeling, As if slightly explained, so many events came upon her at once. Everything was changing. She was just surrounded as in a whirlpool. Good thing Betty hadn't lost her head and had sorted it out. The housing issue. Not even 2 hours later, they were already looking around their new living space. One room, of course. However, the owners were obviously skillful themselves because they managed to turn a small space into two separated by a closet and rooms with everything they needed. Not chambers, of course, but much better than a dorm room, where 3 or 4 people would have to live. It looked like things had turned out for the best, Betty said, falling onto the bed and stretching out blissfully. Might as well celebrate such a thing. I winked. She pulled a bottle of wine out of her bag, hoping to celebrate so confidently, was that even bought the wine yesterday. And there it was, she announced. Look for glasses in the kitchen. I'm sure there's some. Oh, I don't drink, Cindy admitted. I don't drink either. We're just a little bit. I don't get it, Betty. I don't drink at all. Cindy lowered her head like she was confessing something shameful. My body doesn't take to drunks instantly. I can even pass out. It's just a peculiarity of the body. It can't be helped. Yes, my friend, you're unlucky. Betty said. Well, you have a cup of tea, and I'll have a drink, if you don't mind. I don't care if you're allergic to nuts or chocolate. Cindy smiled. It's not the other's fault that I have these quirks. Never mind. Betty waved her hand and held out a glass in her direction. They chuckled and chugged and chatted for a long time afterward, telling each other about themselves. Despite their different personalities, the girls had much in common. Both came from small villages. Both were excellent students and even liked the same books. Both were raised by their mothers. Only Cindy's father died of a heart attack, and Betty's father went to another family, considering his duty to his ex-wife and daughter fulfilled. So I know for a fact all men are assholes, Betty said as she poured herself a third glass. You can't trust them. You just have to take advantage of them. So I look around for a year to choose a richer man, and I'm spinning. And let him provide for me. They should pay for us not to deny ourselves anything. What about love? Cindy asked quietly. Betty stared at her in surprise. What love? It's only love in books. High feelings. In fact, it's simpler and simpler, like in animals. The male grooms the female until he climbs on top of her, and then it's mucking out. Suit yourself. He's back on the hunt. And the sooner you realize that, the easier it'll be. Cindy remained silent, though a protest was brewing inside her. What kind of world is this, where everything is arranged on a give-or-take basis? Betty is just resentful of life, so she defends herself in advance. Cindy's life would be different. She'll have love and a family. The next day, slightly beaten, they went into the cafe. But all fears, if there were any, were in vain. They were greeted favorably, bantering, drinking, and smiling. Great. Youngblood, a joker, a healthy Uncle 8. Chef Kevin, what did the newcomers get? That's right, Betty. It's not very tasty to chew on science. We better join in here for a year and go for a second spiral. You're so perky. Kevin rejoiced. And the kitchen was filled with stories of thunder laughter. We know such perky ones. The waitress Jenna squinted at Betty, a girl of about 25. Betty she immediately identified as a potential competitor and therefore disliked her. First, they pretend to be punks, then they hit on the customers. Wow, pretend. Betty was surprised. You're just sharing your life experiences with us. The cook laughed again. The fellow waiter who had met them yesterday chuckled and gave them a thumbs up. Jenna shook her lips. Why don't you say something? The cook turned to Cindy. I'm considering it, she answered honestly. I'm determining the front of the work, so to speak. Yes, wait, you with fronts? Kevin brushed it off. We're peaceful here, mostly, except for the occasional sniping. But that's okay, it's the good life. He looked at Jenna and Tony. Both waiters immediately made perplexed expressions. So, in another sterner tone, the chef continued. Remember, girls don't troll, harass, or offend. That goes for both of you. Come on, Kevin. Tony looked offended. What are you starting? I was just kidding. Make sure I'm not joking. The cook seemed to be joking, but Tony pulled his head back into his shoulders under his hard stare. If it's all clear, let's all get to work. We'll be opening soon. You take the hall, I'll get the new guys up to speed. Let them sneak in capriciously, said Jenna, but under Kevin's gaze, and proudly jutting her chin. Tony followed her out the door. Don't worry, girls. Cook turned to Cindy and Betty. Those two sure do get into a lot of trouble. They talk to each other like cat and dog, too. But you won't get hurt. That's what I'm talking about. I myself have 3 daughters growing up. Kevin proudly drank his belly. And Surin's a treasure you can't find anywhere else. So here's my advice. Work honestly, and everything will be fine. You'll find something to eat, and the money will be good. A few minutes later, the girls, having finally calmed down, were busy in the kitchen under the approving gaze of the cook. Looking into the kitchen, the owner of the cafe looked questioningly at the cook. He gave him a thumbs up. Surin nodded and disappeared. And the girls, engrossed in their work and conversation, didn't even notice it. The day flew by quickly. Cindy was surprised that it was already time to leave. The bitterness of not being able to enroll had dulled somewhat. Though the resentment, of course, was still there for her mother. She had gathered that it was okay, and now she was ashamed. But it was better that way than to tell the truth and upset. Mom is already all the neighbors probably bragged that her daughter will be a student. However, the warm welcome, the cook's good-natured attitude, and the delicious lunch raised the degree of mood. They also brought with them and not leftovers of some kind. Straight from the kitchen. Go home. Enough for the first time. The cook told them approvingly, looking at the mountains of dishes and the tables and stove washed to a shine. They did a good job, cheerfully saying goodbye to the kind uncle, the cook, only at first glance, who turned out to be formidable girls, hurried home. Now we'll try it. Betty rejoiced, weighing with pleasure on her hand a full bag, and no need to buy anything. That was lucky. That was lucky. They had managed to walk halfway to the bus stop when a crowd of grimy gypsy children appeared as if from under the ground and surrounded them, grabbing their hands and clothes. Auntie, give me some money. We want to eat. And they demandingly looked into the girls' eyes and tangled under their feet. Get out of here, or I'll call the police. Betty made a frightened face, but it didn't stop them. They were still hanging on the girls, circling around them. Let's give them food. They're really hungry. Cindy pulled from her hands. Betty Bag pulled out a bundle of food. Here you go. The educated kids snatched the supplies from her hands and carried them away. They chatted excitedly. What's wrong with you? Not at all. Betty twiddled his thumb at his temple. They're beggars. They're probably just pestering for sport. What are we going to eat? Shall we buy something? Cindy said guiltily. I'm sorry. They seemed so hungry. Well, Betty realized it was useless to argue. Of course it was. We'd rather starve. Remember, friend, you're not Christ with 3 loaves of bread. I don't pretend to be, Cindy said. Come on, let's go, Mother Teresa. Betty just didn't know how to stay angry for long. She always preferred to think positively. The girls went to the bus stop, not noticing that a black car with tinted windows was following them. 2 people were talking softly in the back seat. What do you want to bet? Asked the older one. Bet, replied the second. The first one's voice sounded mocking. You still believe in people, but then it's your own fault. How else do I teach you? How? The second had just transferred the agreed bet with an impressive number of zeros. His buddy looked at the transfer message, chuckled, and said cheerfully, Don't worry, bro, I'll take the consolation ice cream. I expect to win quietly, his companion replied and commanded the driver. And now home. The next day at work waiting news darkened Cindy's mood. The dishwasher had broken down. Kevin called a repairman. He fiddled for a long time and then waved his hands. It would be easier to buy a new one. It's time to throw it out. You should throw everything away. The cook was angry. It worked for a year. As soon as the warranty period expired, it started to go crazy. I'm sure that they put it together on purpose so that people buy it more often and lay out their money, but I can't do it here. We need to take to the workshop, sighed the master and continued, That's why you complain from the cafe popular owner is probably not poor. And you do not count other people's money, sternly narrowed his eyebrows cook. Sorkin built his business from the ground up, earned his reputation honestly. In addition, the man's grief had buried his wife a year ago. Now his parents are on him, and her daughter is studying abroad. He also sent a lot of expenses. So don't talk about it. Take it in for repair. The master cringed, and he took away the proper equipment. Wow, Betty turned to Cindy. She spoke in a low voice, and our master comes out a widower. Betty, what are you doing? Cindy was surprised. He's so old. Betty waved her hand in the air. 40 years old, no more. How do you know? I'll take a look. All right, you take a look. I'll do the dishes. Cindy bravely set to work. At first, she thought it would be a piece of cake to deal with the pile of dishes. But the plates were gone. And then she turned up the heat. She only realized when her fingers turned red. And even, I think, oozed once. Are you out of your mind? The cook turned his attention to scrutinize the girl's own hands. Who are gloves invented for? It's more convenient to wear them like this. Cindy, still upset, waved them away. Have a rest, sit in the hall. Kevin sorrowfully faltered his tongue. If you make a fool pray to God, he'll break his forehead. Cindy smiled at him and hurried into the hall. Betty looked slyly at the cook, but he only wagged his finger at her playfully. Work, he said. The sun was still high. At this hour, the cafe was really empty. Taking advantage of the respite, the waiters arranged themselves a tea party. They treated themselves to local cakes. Jenna waved her hand favorably. Having made sure that Cindy was not in her place, the waitress treated her much more kindly than Betty. Tony sent her hinted thoughts, different looks, at every opportunity. Cindy, however, paid no attention to him. And he fell behind. Tea, please. He lifted himself up, mimicking an ugly footman. Cindy sat down and nodded regally. I'll have some. The Tony of ceremony poured her a cup of tea, and the girl blissfully closed her eyes. Those few seconds were enough for the atmosphere of harmony and coziness to suddenly shatter. Hey, where are you going? Dummy? Shouted over her ear. Tony, get out. I'm sorry. It was a quiet voice, almost a whisper. I'd like a glass of water. A pill, please. Have mercy. Aha, water for you. Tony was already at the door. They were pushing some third-rate dressed man out. Don't go, this is a decent place. What if people see we got bums hanging around? The poor man whispered helplessly, looking back at the girls. Not being able to stand it, Cindy jumped off her seat on the floor, chalked the cup with water, and thinking, grabbed the decanter as well. Then she rushed after him. Leave him alone. She pushed away from the fleeing Tony and held out the cup. Here's water to drink from the rag, stuck out a grubby hand and clutched at the cup. There was no face to be seen. Partly it was hidden by a hood, partly by dirty greasy coochies. The bum took the cup and began to drink in greedy gulps. Thank you. He tried to return the cup, but Tony punched him in the arm. The cup fell and broke. Who's going to drink after you? The waiter hissed. People like you should be poisoned like rats, so they don't spread the disease. Cindy didn't know what made her lift the carafe up and pour water on Tony. Chill. You're saying nasty things. Her eyes sparkled, and Tony knocked himself out. Disappeared inside the cafe. Cindy turned around to apologize for him, but the bum had already mysteriously disappeared. Shrugging, the girl returned to the lounge. There Jenna was consoling Tony. I'll remember this for you. The waiter hissed. Will you beg me on your knees to forgive you? I won't, believe me. Cindy shook her head. The mood was ruined, however, and she returned to the kitchen. Betty noticed that her friend was upset about something and tried to approach her with questions. However, the girl nodded at the cook and shook her head negatively, not now. At home, she recounted the incident. Betty wrinkled his nose and sighed, Tony cowered. And such are the most vindictive, making an enemy out of a miserable bum. What did you want? He was just asking for a glass of water. What if he got sick? How can you refuse something as small as that? A homeless man is a human being too. Cindy justified herself. Yes, you're amazingly gullible. Betty shook her head. What if he was looking around? What would he steal? Les couldn't stand Cindy. If you put it that way, he'd start hiding things from me. I might decide to steal it and sell it on the market. Betty hummed and looked at her friend. Where was her verdict? You'd rather take the last of it off yourself than give it away. What makes you think that? You've known me for days. Cindy wouldn't give up. You've got a good ear written on your forehead. Betty laughed and reached for a cookie. I hope those gypsies enjoyed our failed dinner. At that time, the very two from the car were sitting at a table in the restaurant. See, I won. With undisguised triumph, said one of the interlocutors. The second one hummed and coldly transferred the agreed amount to him. At the same time, returned the bet and yawned. Lucky you. But that's the exception rather than the rule. Give me a chance to win it back. Of course, shrugged the first. Then let's raise the stakes. The other's eyes lit up with hunting excitement. Betty was right. Tony had a grudge. And every chance he got, he tried to annoy Cindy. He groped her, he slapped her around. But he persisted in his war. Yes, I will complain about this quarrel, Betty said more than once. However, it seemed to Cindy that it was simply not nice to address the master on such matters. It was not enough to be known as a snitch. Thunder came when the owner of the cafe lost a large sum of money. He kept cash on him for emergencies, like when he was paying off his suppliers. And there were all sorts of people. Some of them needed cash. Sharon made no secret of his savings. Everyone knew where his stash was kept. After work, the frowning boss gathered everyone in his office and announced that it was missing. I don't know why any of you took the money, and I don't want to know, so I'm making a condition. I don't want to humiliate you all with suspicion. Let this man confess. What shall we do with him? I'll decide without bringing the matter to the police. Everyone looked at each other, shrugging their shoulders in bewilderment. The event was out of the ordinary, and everyone hoped that there was some misunderstanding. The owner sighed bitterly and rose from the table. Please forgive me, but I want to see the contents of your bags and pockets. Sharon started to Kevin, but shrank under the chief's fiery gaze and was the first to turn out his pockets, followed by Tony, who ostentatiously laid out his possessions. Cindy walked over to the desk. A third opened her purse and flipped it over the desk. So much for stunned, Betty pronounced, staring at the thick wad of bills tumbling out of the bag. Cindy clamped her hand over her mouth to keep from shrieking. There you go, said Tony quietly in the silence that ensued. Everyone is free to go. Once again, I apologize for the search. What about you, Cindy? You don't work here anymore. I'm not going to report you to the police. Just go away, Sharon said in a tired voice without looking at the stunned girl. It's not my fault. Cindy is at a loss. Looking around, the cook looked at her with regret. Jenna surprised. Betty with darting eyes. Tony grinning gloatingly. You're the one who set it all up. Cindy threw herself at the waiter with fists. Stop this right now. Sharon bellowed. I didn't expect this from you, did I? Yeah, I really haven't seen any money in my eyes. Cindy cried. Maybe it wasn't her? Standing up for Betty's friend? Maybe it was planted on her? And who's so slick? Tony asked snidely, isn't it you? Betty shut up abruptly and twiddled her thumb at her temple. You're out of your mind. We're friends. Oh please, girlfriends, taunted Tony. Of course you could have set her up. And you have your reasons. You like Sharon, and he treats you both like family. So you're taking out the competition. Betty suddenly blushed. Sharon stared at her, then at Tony. That's it then. Finally, he said to Cindy, I won't keep you any longer. I'll ask the rest of you to get back to work. And stop making theater here. He slammed the table forcefully. Cindy grabbed her bag and ran out into the street. She was shaking from the experience. It's clear that Tony's getting back at her. He's been poking his nose into everything and has access to the office of the bosses. Besides, Sarin left it open a lot. But how can she prove it wasn't her fault? And should she now that she's been kicked out? Cindy wandered around the city all day, trying to calm down. But in the evening, she realized that she could suffer for a long time, and she had to spend the night somewhere. Besides, she was hungry and very hungry. The girl returned home. Betty opened the door, hugged her, and ordered her in a stern voice. Don't you start crying. I know it's not you and everyone else thinks otherwise. Cindy replied in a stricken voice. Betty sighed and pointed to the set table. Let's get something to eat, shall we? Would you like some wine? Yeah, Cindy decided she had nothing to lose. The first sip warmed her insides. It made it easier to breathe, so she downed the rest of the wine, weak though it was. It went to her head, and she suddenly asked Betty, "What was that creep saying about you and Shuren?" Betty became purple, but did not want to lie to her friend. Remarked, "So, I really like the fight. But that doesn't mean Tony's right that I'm willing to set you up. I wouldn't dream of it." He shook his head. "Cindy Lissy, what are you doing? He's old." "He's not old at all." I got mad. "Betty, he's a little over 40. He's in the prime of his manhood." "I thought you wanted an oligarch." I couldn't understand it, Cindy. But I did. Betty snapped at me. And then I thought, what the hell do I need an oligarch for? They have a wallet instead of a heart. Shuren is a good man. He's built his own business. He doesn't bow to bandits either. He's having a hard time. Lost his wife recently. So he's got a daughter your age, shook her head, the rather lovely Cindy. So what? Betty wouldn't give up. She's abroad. I'm here. Maybe it'll work out. All right, love and advice. Cindy suddenly burst into tears, smearing tears down her cheeks. Stop it. I'll find a way to convince Shuren. Betty jumped up, hugged her, started pumping her like a small child. You want me to find someone to scare Tony? Don't even think about it. Cindy sobbed out a stinky sob. I'll start looking for another job tomorrow. It only seems easy to find a job in the capital. In fact, there are a lot of pitfalls. You need professionals with experience. For a girl with no education, yesterday's schoolgirl, the choice is poor. Cindy went around several places, checking with the ads, but she had no luck at all. Either something dubious was offered or the place was already taken. Her heart was becoming more and more anxious, and she felt despair. And what now to return home with her tail up? Sighing, she bought a glass of coffee, once again appearing in the capital's prices. However, there was almost no strength. Besides, after alcohol, she had a headache with bread, hot water, and a drink. She felt sorry for herself, not knowing what to dare to do. Hey, beautiful. Why so sad? A shudder rang out above her ear. Cindy raised her head. Nearby stood a gypsy woman and looked at her merrily. Hop a golden pen Yakuntova, by fortune telling the whole truth, I'll tell you happiness awaits you. She grabbed the girl by the sleeve. I'm sorry, I have nothing to pay with. Cindy sighed. I used my last money to buy coffee, and you're wrong about happiness. I've just been fired from my job, I've been lied to. And you have a heart of gold. You can live without gold, can't you? The gypsy laughed. Don't need anything, I'll just guess. Probably not worth it. Cindy tried to evade. But it was not so easy to get away from the gypsy. You're wrong not to believe. The gypsy woman said with conviction. Be patient. Life will get better soon enough. You'll find love. You'll be rich. Thank you for your kind words. Cindy smiled against her will. Such fabulous things, the gypsy said. And good luck to you. Remember, have faith and be yourself. The gypsy woman admonished and left, swaying, hips in flowers and skirts. Cindy looked after her and smiled at the gypsy. The gypsy had guessed happiness for free. There are such miracles. And at that moment the phone rang. Cindy looked at the monitor. The number was unfamiliar. I see. It was either an advertisement or a scam. She indifferently put the cell phone away in her bag. But a couple minutes later, it came back on. On the fifth call, she got angry and decided to tell the unknown person everything she thought about him. What do you want? She bellowed. I think you want this, answered a calm male voice. Did you come to us looking for a job? Oh, I'm sorry. Cindy, instantly confused, just a number unfamiliar. And I'm not worried, the voice replied. If you are still interested in the vacancy, come for an interview at the address. Cindy wrote down the address and confirmed her willingness to come. It was only when the invisible interlocutor disconnected that she realized that she had not even had time to ask what kind of job she was being offered. However, the specified place was almost near, and the girl went to the interview, deciding that in any case she would not lose anything. It is always possible to refuse if the proposal is not interested. The office of the firm's stray empress, engaged in organizing leisure activities, looked solid, and this inspired hope. In addition to her, near the office of the interview was waiting for 4 more girls, all of them very pretty. They looked down on Cindy. Instantly, I calculated the cost of her clothes and her complete lack of makeup. The girl felt uncomfortable, but she needed the money and decided to be patient. Daniel's senior manager greeted her in a friendly manner. He asked her a few questions, from which Cindy realized that the firm needed someone like animators. In her school days, she was in a theater club, played all kinds of princess sorceresses. So it would not be difficult for her to play something like that at a corporate party or anniversary. "Great, you suit us radiantly," smiled Daniel. "You can start right away. We have an order." "What do I have to do?" Cindy was confused. "Nothing much." Daniel reassured her. "You will go to this address and congratulate the celebrant on his birthday in the costume of Little Red Riding Hood." And that was it. Cindy couldn't believe money could be made so easily. "Maybe we should organize some games." That's what Daniel was even more excited about. "You're totally on point. I'm sure you'll be a good fit for us." Cindy, under the envious gazes of the girls sitting in the hallway, was taken to the next room, where they picked up the props and the costume that fit perfectly. Daniel exclaimed, "You're adorable. And this embarrassment suits you so well." Cindy did feel a little strange. It was like a theater of the absurd. But she wasn't going to give up before she knew what she was in for. It would take you to an address, then bring you back. Daniel was killing everything around her, peering with oily eyes. The line became uncomfortable, but she immediately pulled herself back to normal male reaction to a young pretty girl, after all. Martin turned out to be a big, uncommunicative man with the appearance of a typical bouncer. He drove silently, glancing at the authorized girl. "Here we are. Let's go," he muttered, stopping outside the mansion. Cindy circled the interior with his eyes. There were definitely some very poor people who lived here. Whoever they were. The driver rang the gate. They pulled apart. Cindy looked back helplessly at the sullen fellow. "Go," he hurried on. "I'll wait here." Gathering her wits, the girl followed the path through the manicured garden and pulled the doorknob. Inside, the fun was in full swing. Cindy was greeted with whistles and cheers. "Hello, it's me, Red Riding Hood." Slightly stammering began, the girl brought greetings to our Jubilee. "And this is me, the Gray Wolf," shouted one of the gathered, quite drunken men. "And you are my sweetie pie. Come here, I'll eat you." Cindy, before she knew it, was picked up and put on the table. "Dance," they shouted from the crowd. The girl was confused and carefully made a few dance moves, trying not to drop the flute and plates with appetizers. Little Red Riding Hood Morefire had fun walking around. "Give her some wine, she's a little sour." "No, I don't drink." Cindy took a chance, but she wasn't listened to. The one she'd identified as her Jubilee. Mushroom took her from the table and sat her on his lap. And Bella sang to her breasts. Cindy did not hold back, slapped him and screamed, hoping that Martin would hear and bail her out of this ridiculous situation. "Why are you yelling?" The man was surprised. "Then you know. Where were you going?" "Happy birthday." As the animator whispered, Cindy already guessed how wrong she was. "So we're not children," hummed the Jubilee. "Let's have some wine, the bread is stirred up, and then it will go on its own." "I don't drink," doomed whispered Cindy. "I'd like some water, please." "Water, water." The man winked and was handed a glass. The girl took a sip and coughed. There was vodka in the glass. And then she felt she was flying somewhere and lost consciousness. She didn't hear or see anything else. "Get away from her, you can't see. She's really sick." One of the guests, crouched next to the girl lying on the floor, carefully deciphered the corset. "I've had it." Who knew it was true? Country fool. With annoyance, said the Jubilee still does not drink. There's no such thing. "Okay, I admit it. I bet again." "I'll transfer the bet. Can you think of anything but money? You're the one who got angry." "What are we going to do about her? Should we call a doctor?" "Yeah, she's already waking up." The other one waved his hand. "Take her to the car. And give her some money." Cindy opened her eyes, not realizing where she was. And only by the movement and the peaceful hum of the engine realized in the car interior. remembering everything that had happened. The girl in horror began to feel herself. The clothes are intact. Nothing hurts. Only dizziness and a nasty taste in her mouth. She had been slipped vodka. "I'd rather have poison. Are you okay?" asked the driver, noticing she was awake, unharmed. Cindy tried to sit up. It worked on the third try. "Don't you think you're getting into this kind of business?" The driver continued. "I thought," Cindy said, stammering. "Congratulations on the job. You weren't thinking." Martin glanced at her through the mirror, then sighed and held out a pack of tissues and Tetris. "And try using your brain next time," Cindy exclaimed. Out of habit, shoved the napkins into her pocket. Something got in the way, and rummaging there, she produced a thick wad of money. "What's this?" she shrieked in amazement. "A fee." Looking at his passenger again, Martin determined. "Why are they so generous?" "I see. I guess it's for your silence. I don't want anything." Cindy got angry too. "They're perverts. Give them that money back." "Hide it," Martin grumbled. "Listen to me carefully. Keep the money, and forget this whole thing like a bad dream. And next time think before you take a job. This one's not for you. I get it, Cindy said. "Your clothes are in the bag there," nodded the driver. "On the bag changed." "I won't look." Cindy pulled off her hated suit and slipped into her usual jeans. The driver relented, dropping her off right at her house. Cindy jumped out of the car, out of the beaters. With all her heart, she flew into the entryway. Martin bent all over the seat and glanced over to where she had just sat. The hunch turned out to be correct. A wad of money lay on the leather seat. The driver dialed a familiar number. She didn't take the money, he informed someone. A smile appeared on his face, and he swore a lot of perverted names. "Maybe she's really stupid," asked the one who had recently played the Jubilee. "Or maybe it's you who is used to everything being bought and sold," objected the younger one. "Robert, you are Robert." It turns out, grinned his brother, still upset by the loss, and marry her. "It'll be just like in the Cinderella story." "Maybe I will," the younger one said in an impassioned voice. "But she won't marry you." The second one began. "Why not?" Robert was surprised. "I'll bet," the older one inquired ingratiatingly. "Just dibs. The bet is 100 grand bucks." Deal, replied the younger man, and realized that he had fallen for it once again. "David, you're a snake of temptation. Money's ready." Rubbing his hands together, his brother replied, "If he knows a little about women, and he was absolutely sure that he did, he will get back the double loss." "You're due in a month. You'll go." 2 weeks will be enough," Robert replied. Only now he realized it was the girl. Really got him. Married, then married. After all, no one had canceled sham marriages. Cindy pressed the bell and pressed it until Betty opened it. "Where have you been hanging around? Did you even look at your watch? I was worried sick." She pounced on her friend, but seeing her frightened face, she quickly dragged the girl into the apartment and closed the door. Only then went on to ask her what happened. "Lots of stuff." Cindy sank to the floor right by the door and burst into tears. Betty sat down beside her and hugged her, whispering something tender. Only when the flow of tears was over did Cindy still tell her friend about her misadventures. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Betty looked around the girl and sighed. "You really are a little girl, aren't you, in your village? No TVs, no internet. You really didn't realize what services would be required of you. What did you say? It's called the Naughty Empress. Think about it. What kind of a decent place would call itself that?" No, of course she didn't. I looked up at her with tormented eyes. "Cindy, I was glad I got a job so quickly, so I wouldn't have to sit on your back." Silly Betty shrugged. "We'll get you a job at the ad place, we'll see. Now go to bed." Cindy, swaying, shaved into the bathtub. Betty looked at her, sighed, and muttered to herself, "I don't understand the other thing. How did they let you go? Did they? A guardian angel who's a fool and takes care of the little ones. You're 2 in 1. In the morning, having secured Cindy's promise that without her she would not try to find a job and would not go further from the house than the yard, Betty scurried off to the cafe, relocating and preparing an unpretentious lunch. Cindy was quickly bored and decided to take a walk. There was a small, cozy public garden near the house. At this time, there was no one there, except for a couple of moms with strollers. Cindy chose a bench in a secluded corner and sat down, sinking into unhappy thoughts. She had not expected that the capital would receive her so unkindly. They say, of course, that Moscow doesn't believe in tears, but as if too many of them have already been shed. Maybe it's a clear hint: go back to that girl and go back to your place. You got no business being here. She would. But it's embarrassing. Mom will be upset, and the neighbors will feel sorry for her, but they'll be happy. They say, here's our upstart without a red diploma. And she thought so hard that she shuddered when she found out that she was not alone on the bench. Here's Cindy for you. A huge bouquet of white chrysanthemums lay in her lap. A handsome young man about her age sat next to her and smiled at me. I know you. Yes, we know each other in absentia. The stranger smiled welcomingly. Can I ask you one thing? That depends. Cautiously, she replied. Don't refuse right away. Even if my offer seems very strange to you, she suggested. You know, I can hardly promise that. The girl shook her head. I've had so many strange and unpleasant things happen to me lately that it's time to stop trusting people. It just so happens that I had something to do with what happened to you. The young man sighed, noting the flicker of interest in her eyes and her obvious surprise. He continued, and I'd like to make things right. If you'll give me the opportunity, of course. But for now, I promise only to listen to you. Cindy was very interested. Even the tears dried up. She's outside the house. There are people around. What could happen to her? We might as well listen to what he has to say. My name is Robert. If that means anything to you. The young man began. Cindy shook her head. He seemed surprised, but tried not to show a slight disappointment. I understand you're new to the capital. Let's just say that the family name is quite well known here, though primarily, of course, because of my father. We have, shall we say, a complicated relationship. We hardly ever speak to each other. However, after my mother's death, he felt it his duty to give us an impressive inheritance. That's where my father's love ended. But with this money, we founded a firm that organizes all sorts of entertainment raffles, bets, extreme vacations. A thought crossed Cindy's mind. I tried to get a job yesterday at a firm called the Naughty Empress, where they offered something like that. She began slowly. Yes, that was our office. Robert bowed his head for the time being. And the one who played the role of the birthday boy was my brother David. So the whole thing was a setup. Inside Cindy, a wave of resentment was rising. Yes, Robert didn't deny it. You see, we had an argument with my brother. How was it that the girl still didn't understand? Robert was clearly embarrassed, but he decided to go all the way. Perhaps I should tell you from the beginning. Just don't interrupt or try to leave. This is very important. He noticed that Cindy was trying to get up from the bench. Remember the homeless guy your waiter wanted to kick out the door? And he succeeded. Cindy looked at Robert, not wanting to believe the obvious. Was the bum really you? Yes, it was our first argument, the young man answered honestly. We often use this technique. Those who use the services of our firm usually want to tickle their nerves. So they dress up as bums on both horns. The one who collects the most alms wins. The stakes in this game are very high. This time we decided to try it ourselves. What's it like? You can't offer a favor. I have no idea what a real homeless person looks like or how society treats them. You were very persuasive, Cindy said slowly, feeling herself beginning to procure. And your kind heart helped me win, but radiantly, smiled Robert. My brother was betting that no one would ever think of handing a dirty bum a glass of water. But it did to me, as you can see, though it ended up costing me my job. Cindy looked at this expensively dressed, well-groomed fellow, who was looking at her now with a slightly guilty smile, and pondered did he not realize that he had ruined her life. Ah, Cindy, believe me, it's not worth your trouble. Robert waved it away. Why do you want this job? I'm ready to offer a much better option to work as a Red Riding Hood, or some other toy for rich perverts? Cindy asked slowly. Agreed, it was too much. Robert waved his hands. My brother was so sure that you would agree to get naked for good money. I'm sorry, Cindy, he doesn't know you at all. You don't know me either, Cindy retorted. I do now, Robert put his hand to his heart. You are the most honest and unselfish and kind girl in the world. And I beg you to be my wife. Cindy had just gathered in air in her lungs to utter all that she thought of this for Gold Boy and his brothers. However, upon hearing such a thing, she choked and coughed. Cindy, are you all right? Friendly? Asked Robert. How about some water? Cindy shook her head and stood up from the bench, carefully dropping the bouquet into the urn. Thank you for that flattering offer. I must decline, however. I think, with your money, you will persuade someone to play this role, she said, holding back her rage. Cindy. Robert jumped to his feet, blocking her way. How hot-headed are you? Just gunpowder. You haven't finished listening. This is about an effective marriage. We had an argument. Go to hell. Spoken. She clearly enunciates every word with her brother, and argue all you want. Cindy, wait. Robert still didn't seem to believe it, but she was already walking the way without turning around. Okay, the young man grinned. It was clear, however, that he had been dealt a severe blow to his ego. You don't think I'm going to back down that easily. It's not even about the money anymore. You're going to be my Cindy. Betty returned in the evening worried and gloomy. When asked, Cindy was reluctant to answer. It seems there's going to be some changes at work. What kind of changes? Cindy poured her tea and sat down across from her. I'd overheard. Betty looked up at her with overly honest eyes. I see, overheard. There was a rich buyer for the cafe. Sharon refused at first, but apparently they offered really good money. Now we're wondering what will happen next. What are you worried about? Cindy was surprised. You're so full of it. Betty shook her hands. First of all, Sharon will probably leave, and I have far-reaching plans for him. So you were serious about him. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Cindy smiled a yes, Betty. Yes, I really like him a lot. Betty nodded. And now what? I've only just started making eyes at him. Well, now you'll have to be honest, Cindy said. I'm afraid for my place too. Betty shook her hands. What if the new owner drives us out and hires new ones? Maybe not even then. Cindy realized that her friend had reason to be concerned. We don't know who the buyer is. He promised to come tomorrow, sighed Betty. But why does it have to be so complicated? Cindy shrugged. She felt sorry for herself. Besides, 2 unemployed girls in one rented apartment was too much. They fell asleep late. They talked, shared their worries. In the morning, just after a distraught Betty had gone to work, Cindy's phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number. Cindy didn't pick up the phone for a long time. However, the unknown person was persistent. Cindy answered, trying to put more indignation in her voice. Cindy, it's Robert. The cell phone answered. Come downstairs, please. I have a surprise for you. I wouldn't dream of it, the girl said. How did you get my number anyway? Well, it was easy. Robert dismissed her question. You want to help your friend and other colleagues, even if they are ex-colleagues. How do you know? Now Cindy was really intrigued. I suggest you come with me to the cafe. I'll explain everything there. Besides, I can prove that you were wrongly accused of theft, Robert said and disconnected. His calculation was justified. The girl became very curious. Thinking about it, what does she have to lose? Betty went downstairs. Near the expensive foreign car stood Robert and waved her hello. I thought that we dotted all the I's yesterday, proudly raising his chin, Cindy declared. Robert made a belittling gesture to Cindy. I would like to rehabilitate myself in your eyes. I have followed the developments and conducted my own investigation. Let me do something to make sure that no stain is put on your good name. All right, Cindy took pity on him, believing him to be sincere. Still, as they pulled up in front of the cafe, her heart shook like a hare's tail. Not long ago, she had left this establishment branded as a thief. Did they all really believe she could have done such a thing? Robert touched her elbow, and that gave her courage. The girl entered the cafe. Robert followed and stood beside her in the middle of the room, raising his hand to attract attention. May I have your attention, please? Please, called Sharon Ivanisov loudly. He came out to the voiced Sharon. He looked surprised to see Cindy. Kevin and Betty, the cleaning lady, looked out of the kitchen and opened her mouth in amazement. The waitress Jenna was already in the hall. Tony, on the other hand, tried to sneak away to stand. Turning to the waiter, Robert said, "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Robert, and I represent the interests of the new owner of this cafe, or rather, the hostess." With these words, he pointed at Cindy, and all eyes were fixed on the uncomprehending girl. She stood like a statue, unable to move from her seat. "Yes, I have made the purchase." To transfer the title to Cindy, Robert went on nonchalantly. "But first I have to clear her name in the eyes of her future employees. Hey you, that was Tony. Tell me, I'm the one who took the money." He was barely audible. "I can't hear any louder," Robert demanded. "I took the money." Tony spoke louder to retaliate. "Here she is." He nodded at Cindy and slipped it into his purse. "So this is how you appreciated getting your shirt dirty," Robert's voice sounded contemptuous. There was a bad light in Tony's eyes. "That's about as good as it gets. You pretended to be miserable to argue about how callous people's hearts are. That's your morality for what you do. I'll answer for it, Robert. But you're fired. I hope the money I paid you is enough to buy your own laundry detergent." Tony hissed and walked out, slamming the door. Robert turned to Cindy. "The cafe belongs to you now. You're the owner." "Sharon, and how did you, Cindy, look at your former boss?" He waved his hands. "Well, what can you do, since it turned out that way? I'm going home. The money is very good, and I really need it now." "I see," Cindy turned to Robert. "So I'm the boss, and I can do what I want." Of course, the man looked expectant. "Great." The girl held out the papers confusedly to the trash. "Well, then I give you this cafe. We can make everything legally as a deed of gift. But that's not right. I took the money." He protested. "Why wouldn't you? You sold it fair and square, and I took it and gave it back." It was like Cindy was possessed. Such an impish empress. Robert was staring at her with his eyes wide open. "Look," the girl looked at him squeamishly and regretfully. "Are you so used to measuring everything by money? You just got it for nothing. You inherited it from the sky. You don't know how it's earned. You just made up your own business, finding perverts willing to pay for stupid entertainment. You don't care how your toys feel. You're like leeches." Robert jerked like he'd been punched. "Cindy, you're wrong," he said firmly, looking her in the eye. "Yes, I don't have to work physically in my life. But is that my fault? Try it. Then we'll talk." Cindy didn't realize she'd switched to the first language in the heat of the argument. "And I will." Robert turned to a completely confused Hart and said, "Sharon, as far as I understand, you have a vacancy. Will you take me as a waiter?" In Sharon's eyes, first there was bewilderment, and then appeared a mocking light. He looked at Robert, at Cindy, at Robert again, and nodded. "I think I'll take her on probation. Just so you know, there will be no favors. It's all fair game." Robert seemed seriously inspired by the idea. "I'm ready to start work today." So Sharon smiled at Cindy and asked, "Forgive me, girl, I overreacted. I've done wrong, I'm sorry, and I want to make it up to you." "I gladly," exclaimed Cindy, "at least for now." "I am. I do all the dishes." Everyone around me laughed, only the silent one. Still the cook grumbled. "Yeah, the car's still not fixed. The girl's got her hands all messed up." "What car?" "Robert's on a roll. Maybe I can help." "What kind of dishwasher?" Kevin grumbled. "But look, if you're smart." Half an hour later, the cranky dishwasher was working better than new. And Robert was flying around the room between tables. Like he'd spent his whole life serving food and drink. Betty had made a few scary eyes, demanding an explanation from her friend. But she waved it off. Then it was only at home that they were able to talk. "Wow, like in the movies? Betty, are you a femme fatale?" "You're talking nonsense." Cindy waved it off. Two rich slackers argued over nothing to do. That's what he's trying to do. It's just like a movie. It's called Girls. You know, the one where they bet on the hat. They both looked at each other and fell on the bed, choking with laughter. "Cindy, he's got a crush on you," Betty said suddenly, sitting up on the bed. "Believe me, I know these things. I've got an eye for a meter." "I don't," Cindy cut her off. They settled down well past midnight, and Cindy spent a lot more time flailing around. trying to work out whether she really hated Robert as much as she tried to show the first person they saw. Opening the door of the cafe in the morning, there was Robert. The waiter's uniform sat on him like a mold. A smile played on his lips. "Hello, girls," he said cheerfully, and with a magician's gesture held out to Cindy a rose from behind his back. "Thank you." Cindy accepted the flower with an independent look and went into the kitchen, trying not to look back. She worked furiously to distract herself from the thoughts of the culprit behind the wall. Yes, of course, she'd had a lot of trouble with stupid bets and rich bums. So why was she so willing to forgive Robert so easily? Is it because he's willing to take a job as a waiter to prove to her and Cindy that he's not Belarusian? He doesn't look down on the waitstaff, or maybe it's just because she likes him. "For dreaming?" asked Betty, in a mocking dream and dream voice. And there's Jenna in the audience with her tail wagging. Luring rich people to respect Cindy became unpleasant. Betty's a friend of Betty's, but she's so eager to jab her tongue. Well, let him twist his tail. It's not mine. He's his own. And he's got his own head on his shoulders. And anyway, why are you judging the light? You're dreaming of marrying a rich man too. Dreaming? Yes, Betty calmly parried. And now I've met Sharon and realized that I don't need to get involved with anyone else. That's why you're agonizing. Cindy approached her friend and hugged her impulsively. Confess to him and be done with it. I can't. The usually combative, cheerful Betty now looked at her with miserable eyes. He's so wonderful. Maybe not the richest. But I don't care about that. Even if he stays completely penniless, I'll have, well, all the more talk to him, and everything will be clear. Cindy insisted. He loves his late wife, Betty said in a low voice, and always will. I can't give any advice here, Cindy admitted. We can only hope for time. They say it heals. And also on the fact that there is enough love in his heart to remember his wife, and to open his heart for a new one, alive and healthy. You talk by the book. Betty smiled, though. That's how life happens in women's novels. It's different. Okay, let's get to work, shall we? Cindy loaded a new batch of dishes into the car and gave Robert a glimpse of praise. If it wasn't for him, I'd have to splash around in boiling water again. She took a good look at her fingers. Yeah, they're a mess. I should get a manicure, at least a simple one. The girl smiled at her own thoughts. So you say you don't care about Robert. Then why did you decide to do beauty? At the end of the working day, just before closing time, when the cafe was already empty, Robert, with the permission of the owner, arranged a treat for his just doomed colleagues. At the table, he was joking, charming, and not at all in tune with the golden boy image Cindy had formed in her head. Maybe he's a normal guy. His and his brother's business certainly sucked, but maybe things could still be fixed. After dinner, Robert predictably offered to walk the girls home. Jenna pursed her lips and headed home. It was obvious that she had not given up hope to get a guy with a fat wallet. Though it's probably wrong to say that with a fat credit card nowadays. Yeah, gone are the days when you could hold each bill in your hand, carefully, contemplating what to spend it on. Nowadays, money is just numbers on an account. Maybe that's why it's treated differently. They didn't notice that they were already near the house. I've got to go, Betty said with a sly expression on her face. I'm sleepy. Why don't you two go for another walk? I was going home too. Cindy tried to sneak away, but Robert held her hand. Stay, please. There was something in his voice that made her stop. They stood in silence for a minute. Then Robert spoke to Cindy. I realize that even this is my decision to work at the cafe. You seem to be blissed out. You're probably right to give me a low moral grade. But tell me, is it my fault that I grew up in a well-to-do family? Cindy was silent, staring at him fixedly. I never thought about what I would live on tomorrow, in a month, in a year, Robert continued. That's true, but I always knew otherwise. My father is paying us back for my mother's death. What did your mom die of? Cindy's voice trembled. She must have been very young. Yes, she was. Robert went on. Young, beautiful, kind. Only one woman wasn't enough for my father. He changed them like a child. Toying each time with prettier, newer, trendier ones, his mistresses grew younger and younger. But my mother continued to love him. believed that one day everything would change, and he would realize that a wife and children are enough for happiness. But one day she caught him with another model right in bed. In their marital bed, you know? And her heart couldn't take the blow. Cindy herself did not realize at what moment she took his palm in hers, trying to support him. The girl saw how difficult this confession was for him. No nanny can replace Mom. There was bitterness in Robert's voice. We had everything we could dream of, except for a mother's affection and love. And my father just went on living his usual life. My brother was older, he understood what was going on, and drew his own conclusions. Everything can be bought, whether it's beautiful things or a beautiful body. I guess he could be called a cynic. At least the idea of an entertainment agency for the rich belongs to him. Like the name, which I always thought was idiotic. So I just invested in the business as much as he did and got dividends. Of course, it doesn't make me look good either, but I didn't think about whether it was moral or not. And the endless bets with my brother kept me entertained. It seemed so much fun dressing up as a bum, testing people for kindness. Your reaction surprised me and helped me win the bet on the line. It made me want to stab him harder. Maybe because her whole soul overflowed with sympathy for the two kids who grew up in luxury, but deprived of the most important wealth of a mother's love. She did not want to admit it to herself. Yes, I did. Robert didn't argue. That's when I noticed you. You were different, sincere, right, not like the others. And I had the indiscretion to tell David about you. His reaction was familiar. He thought it was his duty as an older brother to teach me not to open my heart to people, because then they might again cause intolerable and painful things like what our mother had once had to endure. And he offered a new argument to prove that for a lot of money, anyone would go against their beliefs and morals. Believe me, I didn't know he was willing to go that far. Plus, he asked Martin to watch you anyway. It was really scary and disgusting. Cindy remembered greedy hands reaching for her from all sides. Drunken laughter. But some of it was my own fault, she added unexpectedly. You can't be so naive. I decided it was really about an innocent costume greeting. That's just it. Robert looked at her with such eyes that she even felt a little embarrassed. Was he really that good an actor to portray this adoring teenage crush? You're pure, you're bright. You don't know how wonderful you are. And I realize I'm not worthy of a girl like you, he finished. For some reason, Cindy suddenly felt deceived. How could she be? She was the one who should have refused his feelings, and he had just snatched the initiative from her. Believe me, I understand your resentment, Robert continued. For you, marriage and family are sacred. I fell for David's handout and thought I could win your heart. And now you've changed your mind. With a challenge? Cindy asked. No. Now I hope that when I repeat this proposal, you will accept it, and it will mean that our feelings are mutual. Robert answered, brought her hand to his lips, kissed it reverently, and then turned and left. And Cindy stood there for a few minutes with her mouth hanging open, staring after him. Her mind was a mess. Her thoughts jumped from topic to topic. As a result, the girl thought of nothing better than to go up to the apartment and without answering Lisa's questions to close herself in the bathroom. And then she went to sleep on the roof with a blanket over her head. The next day, she still ignored her friend's attempts to pry. What had happened between her and Robert? Betty even pouted a little. However, something soon happened that shifted both girls' attention to another subject. All sorts of visitors came to Sharon's cafe. There were some who even had to be subdued. This rarely happened. The owner had a reputation of a man who was better not to offend. He'd stand up for himself, maybe some powerful friends, but there were still unfortunate misunderstandings. Robert's fighting with someone, Betty shouted. I peeked out of the kitchen at the noise. Cindy dropped the dishes and rushed over to her. Something strange was indeed going on in the hall. Robert grabbed one of the visitors by the pecs and slapped him. They were trying to get separated, and a frightened Jenna was running around them with the look of a put-upon chicken. No one dared offend the girl, even if she was just a waitress, with every word as if to put a point on it. Robert whipped the drunken debauchee, realized he was shouting threats in response. But sensing that the preponderance of power was not on his side, he calmed it down and only twitched with each blow. Leave him to the noise immediately. The debauchee cafe owner appeared. thinking that Shuren was rushing to his aid to cheer him up, and started shouting again and threatening to sue. He dared to stand up for the girl, to the waiter, to the sovereign himself, and all the witnesses of his disgrace. But he was mistaken. Silence. Shuren's eyes threw lightning bolts. You raised your hand against a woman. Some man insulted her. I did. You're all for judging. He ran in drunk and swaying. He ran out of the cafe. His drinking buddies looked at each other. They followed him. One lingered, approached Robert. He shook his head, shook his head, shook his head. There's no forgiveness for a grudge like that. Another man in power might actually sue. Why do you go with such a person? Asked him, shrugged his shoulders, and left the cafe. Everyone huddled around Shuren. He began to grab me by the chest. Jenna sobbed. Then she called him a slutty woman, and Robert stepped in. He demanded an apology, but this one hit me and called me names again. The rest of us just looked at him and didn't say anything. And Robert, I realized who is our hero, said Shuren gloomily. Well done. It was addressed to Robert. Yeah, only now you're in trouble because of me. Robert bowed his head low. Don't think I'll answer. I'm the only one to blame for what happened. We'll figure it out, Shuren sighed. Let's go home. Everyone has to go to work tomorrow, before they close us down. However, the worst fears were justified. In addition, the scoundrel soon filed a lawsuit in court for assault on his person by a waiter, and the apparent patronage of this crime by the owner of the establishment. Shuren came back grim. He was reluctant to answer questions. How do they let such rotten people in power? He doesn't admit guilt. He says he didn't touch the girl. The others at the table confirmed that he's clean, not vicious, and he took off the marks of beating the bastard. What beatings? Robert said grimly. A couple of smacks on the face, that's all I had to do to see him sink to the light. Don't. Shuren shook his head. Anyway, he's willing to keep the case out of court. If he pays me off. How much? Robert asked. The landlord named the amount. Robert whistled, then nodded. Good appetite, but no problem. I'll give you the money. Let him choke on it. Shuren shook his head. You're my employee. I forgot, so I have to answer to Shuren. Robert put his hand to his heart gratefully, looking at the cafe owner. You're an honorable man, but this is a matter of principle. In short, this matter will be settled by me. Cindy looked at him with all her eyes. This man surprised her more and more. But what had he decided to give up? His brother met him with ridicule. Not waiting for a month to pass. Why marry like that? Changed his mind, were the nuts not to his liking. Not to his liking. Rather to his heart's content, Robert confessed. I'll give it to you, don't doubt it. But here's the thing. He told his brother honestly what had happened in the cafe. David frowned. That Robin Hood is the protector of the oppressed. Perplexed, he asked, What are you doing? To show off for the girls? I couldn't bear to see this asshole acting out in front of me, could I? Robert confessed. So I hit him a couple times. Who did you hit? David asked. Robert gave his name and title. Brother whistled a prize. And you're no trifle. I respect that. Why didn't you go after the governor right away? If you was Jenna, I would have kicked his ass, answered Robert grimly, and asked him if he had any money. No money, David replied. Okay, Robert shrugged and turned to leave. Are you going somewhere? The older brother asked. It's not something that can be solved with money. He'll ask for more later. You never forgive someone like that. There's another way, isn't there? You too may not approve of my methods. Tell me. Robert sat down opposite, and they began to hotly discuss the details of the upcoming operation. Will it be in Sudan? Shuren announced to them. In a week's time, gathering everyone in the hall. I don't know how you arranged it, but thank you. Robert's brother helped, he admitted. In a peculiar way, but he helped. Although if it wasn't for me, there'd be no cause for alarm. Actually, you stood up for me. Jenna rose from her seat and kissed Robert defiantly on the cheek. He laughed and kissed her back. Cindy felt that she was somehow unpleasant to look at and turned away. Sveta was right, Shuren admitted. A man should not allow a woman to be humiliated and insulted in his presence, even if she works in the service sector. Otherwise, he is not a man. Golden words, nodded the cook. Why don't you tell me why that creep of a minister backed down? Robert laughed, remembering the story David had told him. Such a bastard must have some equally nasty habits. And he did. My brother and I own a fairly lucrative business, let's just say in the entertainment business. He cast a quick glance at Cindy, but the girl averted her eyes. She still hadn't forgiven her brother Robert for the lousiness test. It had been a scary experience. But Robert was sure that she would not give in to provocation, and he sent Martin to keep an eye on her. So David proposed a combination, as a result of which, through third parties, our hero received a certificate to receive services of a certain kind from our firm. I won't tell you the details. I will only say that in light of recent presidential decisions in our country disapprove of the desire of men, especially high-ranking, especially engaged in policy in the field of education of children and young people, to change into a woman's dress. Is he a transvestite? Jenna, laughing Kevin, spat in his hearts. Hidden, of course. But sometimes he allowed himself liberties, especially of an intimate nature, Robert explained. At least on the video, everything is extremely unambiguous and convincing. He received the recording as a gift from the firm, along with an offer to choose whether to withdraw the lawsuit or become a social media star by force. He chose correctly, so the victims have no claim. And such scum sits in the ministry and gets how to raise children. Kevin couldn't calm down. You should be kicked out of here. Unfortunately, we don't do magic. Not the right profile, Robert grinned. Cindy looked at him with all her eyes and realized she liked him. She liked him a lot and more every day. If it weren't for the stupid bet, why couldn't they just get to know each other like any other normal couple? He's not indifferent to her either. From the same thing, he's trying to prove to her that he can work. He's no stranger to any kind of business. She realized she was completely confused and decided not to make any decisions. Time will pass. Robert will get tired of playing the obliging waiter. He'll go back to his normal life and forget her. Only for some reason, the thought immediately made her nose turn up and make her want to cry. What are you thinking about all the time? Betty asked her. Nothing. Cindy pretended to be extremely enthusiastic about her work. He's good, isn't he? Betty was difficult. To be so easily confused. And brave and determined and handsome. And probably convinced that everything could be solved with money, Cindy parried. But unfortunately, not everything. Betty suddenly gloomed. Do you know why Shurin was willing to sell the cafe? I don't. Cindy caught the change in her voice and turned to her friend. The usually cheerful Betty was clearly ready to cry now. What happened? I didn't want to talk at first, she admitted. You know, it turned out that I accidentally overheard a conversation. Shurin was talking on the phone, and the door to the office was not tightly closed. And I realized that you didn't do it on purpose. Cindy stroked her arm cheerfully. I promise I won't tell anyone. Since you trusted me, it must be serious. Isn't it? Betty looked up at her with a pained look. Turns out his daughter is very sick. She's overseas right now. Turns out she has the same disease as her mother. Shurin paid for her treatment, but now they're refusing her. They said that only a miracle can help, and the chances are slim to none. There's a clinic in Israel. They do experimental medicine, but it's almost impossible to get in. Even with the most money, Shurin sold the cafe first. He hoped he could raise enough money to convince the doctors to take Alina for treatment. But they turned him down. And then you gave him the cafe back, and he gave the money to Robert. Betty sank into a chair, covered her face with her hands, and burst into tears. Cindy rushed to her, put her arms around her, and began to comfort her. I love him, do you understand? Through her tears, barely audible, she whispered, and I can't help it. It's terrible. He suffers in silence. He doesn't say anything to anyone. What am I going to do, Cindy? Maybe your Robert can think of something. Maybe he has some medical connections. Robert? No, there was a voice from the door. Both girls turned their heads sharply. Robert was standing there, and he'd heard everything. Betty said doongly, It turns out that I've been working on someone else's secret, and there's nothing you can do to help. I can't. Slowly said Robert, But I think I know who can. I won't get your hopes up. but I'll try. The thing is that with this man, I have not communicated for many years. It's about time. Without a deal, he left for the gym. This day he left early, having secured the agreement of the owner of the cafe, Cindy and Betty, as soon as the door closed behind him, without conspiring, crossed their fingers for good luck. They couldn't see Robert leave the cafe and stand there for a minute, as if deciding what to do. Then he dialed a number that had miraculously survived in the memory of the phone. He was answered immediately, as if he had been expecting a call. "Hello, it's Robert." "Your son can barely pronounce Robert. I need help." He was ready for anything, first of all for rejection. But he was answered. "Come over." Robert looked at his father and did not recognize him. For years he hated him, despised him, blamed him for his mother's death. He and his brother had made a vow not to talk to the man when they got their independence. They had no idea how he lived, what he did. It was only in the news that their common name was occasionally mentioned. He wasn't prepared to see his father aged like that one day. Nor was he prepared for the fact that one day he would turn to him for help. But fate doesn't like it when people stammer that they've changed a lot. Baryshев Sr. hummed, noticing his confusion. Strongly confessed the son, not wanting to curve his soul. "It's good that you don't lie," nodded the father. "You see, he's doing well. He's playing everything right." Yes, Robert felt a burning desire to turn around and leave. However, his father stopped him. "What was it you wanted to ask? Say, do you still have contacts for Uncle Mike the oncologist?" "You mean Moishe Ben Rook?" A grin spread across his father's face, as if an invisible hand had waved it. "Which one of you is sick? Not us?" Robert hastened to assure him, sensing that the fear in his father's voice was not courtly. "It's about a girl I don't even know, the daughter of my current master." "You got a job, and you're asking for some unknown maiden." Father's eyebrows went up. "But why?" "Because another girl I love asked me to," Robert finished, "and she's the reason I got the job. That's it." Dad was clearly in a state of confusion. "Honestly, I don't understand, but I have Moishe's phone number. We call each other sometimes, reminisce about the good old days. I can't promise anything. The old fox always had a bit of an attitude, but I can call. I could call you right now. I'd appreciate it." Robert kept his eyes on his father. He was visibly revitalized, feeling needed and important. How was he living? What was going on in his life? He and David had cut his father out of their lives a long time ago, punishing him for his betrayal. And after all, in this house, nothing speaks of the presence of a woman. What has changed in the habits of the old catcher? Shalom Moishe. Who else did I recognize? I guess I'll never be richer. And a big bow to you and the family from me. How's that check mark getting better and better? His father kept talking and talking, and Robert wanted to shout unbearably. But he had already finished his business, unable to listen to this empty, from his point of view, chatter. He went out onto the veranda, sank into a rocking chair, and closed his eyes. Memory obligingly slipped him memories of long-forgotten years, when they were a family and his mother was alive. When had that been? It was like another life. Did your countless women bring you happiness, wealth, and status? No. Otherwise, why do you have such emptiness and doom in your eyes? I won't feel sorry for him. Robert was angry with himself. It was all his own fault. If it weren't for the girl's requests, if I hadn't felt sorry for Gino, I wouldn't be here. Just let him make a deal with Uncle Misha and let him treat him. Please, he agreed. His father's appearance on the doorstep interrupted the flow of his decisive thoughts. Let them collect the documents and prepare the girl for the summer. It'll be expensive. Did you know that? Yes. Robert looked him straight in the eye. If money could solve all problems, the world would be a simpler and heartless place. I realized that too late. Father lowered his head. Now you're going to leave and you're not likely to come back. Do I understand correctly? Robert was silent. He wanted very much to reply with a barb, but the words wouldn't come out of his throat. He wondered what Cindy would have said. If she were in his place, she had a good heart. He had no doubt that the girl would have found the strength to make a move toward reconciliation. I hope to invite you to a future wedding. The words escaped from his throat. Beyond will, himself uttered and himself surprised. How confidently it sounded. "You're getting married." When my father was clearly pleased, though we tried not to show it. "I don't know yet," Robert admitted. "But I know exactly who to marry because I don't want anyone else." "Then get married. And never let her go, son." My father's voice sounded muffled. I realized too late. "Forgive me if you can." "Thank you, Father." It was hard to get the words out, but it was easier afterward. "I have to go." Robert was in a hurry. He didn't turn around at the door, but he could feel his father watching him. And also that he was crying. The next morning, Ivanisova gathered all the cafe workers for a meeting. He looked strangely excited, sort of joyful, but somehow timid. As if he believed and disbelieved at the same time. "You're all a great, well-oiled team," he said, hugging each of them. "I'm sure the cafe will keep going, even if I'm off for another month." "What's wrong?" Betty's head popped up. She didn't understand why Shurin had made such a decision. After all, as late as last night, Cindy had called to let her know that things had worked out for Robert. "My daughter will have a complicated surgery in Israel and then rehabilitation," Shurin said. "I want to be there to support her. It is the duty of a father and a loving person to be there for the one you love." "Then I'm coming with you," Betty replied defiantly. There was silence. "Why?" Shurin asked. "Because I love you. And it is the duty of a loving person to be there for a challenge," replied Betty. "Girl, what are you saying?" Shurin said in confusion. "I am an old man almost." Instead of answering, Betty went up to him, hugged him, and kissed him. "I'll fly anyway," she declared. "Can't you forbid me to be around?" Instead of answering, Shurin put his arms around her and pulled her against his chest. The silence was broken by loud applause. Shurin looked at everyone, confused as if he was seeing them for the first time. "I may be an old man, but I am a happy old man," he declared. Further events developed rapidly. In the evening, Shurin left with Betty. Robert took over the general management of the cafe, and a week later came the happy news. The operation was a success, and Shurin and Betty decided to get married and even filed an application for the occasion. A banquet for their own was immediately organized in the cafe, and such sincere joy has not been seen in these walls for a long time. "You may be a fool, but I envy you." David came over and hugged his brother. "Sometimes I look at you and think, maybe people really should be trusted. Or an even stupider idea, maybe love does exist." Robert smiled suddenly. "And then what?" "And then I chase those thoughts away and go on with my life." David laughed. "We cynics are also needed in this world. Otherwise, you would have no one to turn to." "Thank you, brother," Robert said with feeling. "Besides, who is the more cynical of us? Me, because I asked for such a favor, or you, when you agreed to realize it?" "Good must come with fists," said David. "Otherwise, you can't deal with evil. Speaking of good, can you consider that bet a draw? Cindy kind of turned you down. But I know women well. She'll do it." "She already did," Robert laughed. "You wouldn't say no to being a chauffeur. And you didn't say anything." David shrieked. He lost all his solidity and his cool. "So tell me, how did you get her to come to you?" "I didn't." Robert was shining with happiness. "I just repeated my offer. And she said yes. The wedding date's set. We'll celebrate in a cafe. Betty and Aliona are flying in just in time. We'll organize it in the best way," David said. "He's gambling." "No, not your agency." Robert laughed. "Why so?" "Pretend." David was surprised. "And why yours? We're partners." "You can do it on your own," Robert countered. "Besides, I'm thinking of going into the restaurant business. But it's long past time to expand. So I decided to invest. What's Cindy gonna do?" "Has she decided?" David asked. "The most important thing is to get into the program," said Robert. "She will study and help me." "Well, now that you've made up your mind," David said. "Advice and love, yes. One more thing." Robert looked him in the eye. "I wanted to give you a heads up. Anyway, I invited my father to the wedding." "Calm down." David patted him on the shoulder. "He called me the other day, asked me to come over. We met and talked. He's a bit old and tired. He goes to his mother's grave all the time. He's been punished enough to get him to the end." "David, are you sure you're a cynic?" Robert asked. I'm sure, David muttered. And I'm going to prove it again. Already familiar to you from the beginning of the story is a young man. The teacher of the Capital University, nicknamed Salt William, is a big fan of helping applicants to enroll in exchange for services of a certain nature. He was twirling in his hands beautifully decorated certificate for participation in a personal show firm entertainment, the Stray Empress. He had heard from the edge of his ear that they could offer services of any nature. That is, absolutely anything, depending on the client's preference. Surely the certificate must have cost mad money. I wonder who could give such a gift. He helped 3 girls this year. Apparently, one of them appreciated his support. Oh, well. Chick stroked the certificate with his finger and almost drooled, anticipating a marvelous evening in the company of young nymphs. He didn't know that in a week the rector, having received the video of his adventures, would sign a dismissal order. And then there would be a lavish, bright, cheerful wedding, with various contests and sincere wishes. And to this, there is nothing to add, except for the advice. And love. Cindy and Robert, you have a long and interesting life ahead of you, but that's another story.